Hello, world. We are now in 2015. I hope everybody got home safe from their celebrating and their travels, and you're keeping warm. And just a quick note before I introduce my guest. For anybody who lives on a street where the lamppost is not lit, there's a little tag on the pole that gives you the number of that particular pole, so that the PSNH people know exactly where that pole is, and they'll come and they'll fix the light. I was remiss in remembering the 800 number for PSNH, but call PSNH, and when they answer, they give you that option to report a lamppost that is out of order. And the reason I say this is because the streets are incredibly dark, and it's very, very difficult to see human beings crossing, especially between parked cars on a very dark street, and almost hit them. I've been experiencing this a lot lately. I've been going extra slow because the lights hit you coming this way, and you cannot see, no matter how bright the clothing you are wearing, you cannot be seen. So please, if you have a lamppost that is that is not working, call PSNH, give them the tag number, and if there's no tag on the pole, tell them the street that you're calling from, or get the tag number from the one closest to the one that doesn't have one, and that will give them a proximity. I have a guest with me, Mr. Hal Shurtleff.
Yes, Shurtleff.
Shurtleff, and he is with the John Birch Society, and he has some things that he would like to share with you, some information, so welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's my second trip up here in the last 2 days. I was on a show yesterday here.
Okay, so. Well, you were brave to travel in this kind of weather.
Well, it's New England, and it's
You're
January.
used to it,
You're used to it, yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh, you have anything in particular to discuss?
Well, no,
or?
I just, it's very convoluted because on one hand, what you were just talking about, homosexuals are still God's children.
Oh, no, we were talking before the camera was on just about some of the issues that concern parents and what have you.
Okay.
And one of the things, in fact, the show that used to be on here, Education Matters, I was a guest here about, unrelated to this issue, to the John Birch Society, was about our summer camp program that was started up by a few of us here in New Hampshire. But Common Core was what motivated this lady Deborah to start her show, to expose Common Core.
She did a show here too.
Yes, that's right. Yes, and Common Core was written by the Gates Foundation, or funded by the Gates Foundation, and a private entity called the National Governors Association was the one that, there's another group that copyrighted, but the federal government. It's against the law for the federal government to have a national curriculum, but they just said to the states in so many words, you take this money in 2009, 2010, you take this race to the top money, so whatever this top was supposed to be, there's supposed to be this excellence in standards, and when this Common Core curriculum is available, you will have to take it sight unseen. And I think 48 states took the money. And it's sort of, the state legislators, most of them had no idea what was going on. This was all done by the State Department of Education. And then the money was funneled through the different schools.
And where did the money go?
Oh, it was going to the to buy the curriculum and go to the various schools for the curriculum. And when the children were coming home with some of these outrageous and ridiculous things, this crazy math, and they do have a very strong sexual standards in this Common Core that has not been fully implemented. It's in the process of being implemented. And one of the more disturbing aspects of this is data mining, where they get information about that child's family. And there was an example where there was this young lady that came home. She had some red blotches on her hands, on her arms. And I said, what happened? Well, they put this device on her as they were asking her questions. Now, I can understand if the child came in and she was all battered and bruised. Maybe there's some sign of child abuse. Yeah, maybe we should look into this. That's legitimate. That's being responsible. But asking the child questions about, for example, do your parents own a gun? Would you feel comfortable if someone from the school went home and took that gun? Well, this is stuff that's beyond what the school needs to know, and many other questions about what they believe and do they go to church and what church they go to. This is Orwellian and should be rejected by anybody. I don't care what party you belong to. This is totally wrong. And then they have a device where they have the computers, and eventually the children all have computers, all purchased by the same type of system. Textbooks are on their way out, and the computer has an iris scanner. They even have a chair that can, you start asking me questions, and my blood pressure might go up and what have you, and the math problems now. There are children learn differently. We homeschool. Our family homeschools. Some of my children are more bookish, and some of them more visual oriented. We know that, and we kind of cater the programs to that. But these math tests, everybody has to conform to these standards, and they've lowered the standards. They've lowered the bar, and they don't want excellence. They want mediocrity. And if this is fully implemented, we're dumbed down as it is. It's going to be a disaster.
Well, could it be that they want to do that so they can be in control of the ones that they want to control with their intelligence
Well, there's no
level?
question about that. Yeah, there's no question about that. In fact, Bill Clinton, when he was governor of Oklahoma, they had Arkansas, excuse me. They had the governor's school to identify some of the best and brightest to get them into this school. They'll be the future leaders. And they're not going to be promoting limited government under the Constitution, I guarantee you that. They'll be promoting some type of Orwellian police state. So this is happening all over the country. So they get their best and brightest, but most of the people they're encouraged to be they're semi-illiterate, functionally literate, and poor at math, poor at all the basic skills. And by the way, Common Core is just a more recent example of this all-encompassing state and how the government, these public schools, we call them public schools. The right term is government schools. And since the 1840s, Horace Mann, who a lot of people may be familiar with, he is the father of public education, I think is the title. He went over to Germany, over to Prussia, and he saw the Prussian state and that the state-run schools. He liked what he saw. And he came over here, he said, we have to do the same thing. We have to adopt the Prussian model and have complete state control of education. So within a short time, within a couple of decades, every single state had state compulsory education laws. In Massachusetts, where it was the first state, we had the highest literacy. Charles Bulfinch, the man who designed the State House, did a survey, I think it was at 1810 or so, and he determined in the schools of Boston, there was no compulsory education laws, but he said something like 95% of the children are highly literate. All of them had access to education, every one of them. So there was no need to have this compulsory education, and that's what's happened. And today, the literacy rate has dropped dramatically. In fact, you've heard figures that half of American adults are functionally illiterate. That doesn't mean they can't read, but they have difficulty reading. And why is that? We've been learning how to read for years. It's not that difficult a thing when you use intensive phonics. But by the 1930s, every single public school, government school, adopted something called look-say. They get away with phonics, intensive phonics. You see, our English language was built on every word represents a sound. You sound out. There's a few words that are not phonetic. In fact, phonics is PH. It's not puff. But about 85% of the English language is phonetic. Today, children look at the letters that represent sound, just like the Chinese pictograph. And I tell you, there are a lot of languages that are tough to learn, but I think, especially those that have different alphabet than ours. But could you imagine trying to learn Chinese? It's all represents pictures. It's a tough language to learn, to write anyway. And that's what our children face. And that's why there's such a high illiteracy rate, or functional illiteracy. And how do they solve that problem? They drug them down with Ritalin and other psychotropic drugs. And the big pharmacies come. So one of the things that I think we encourage in the John Birch Society is separation of school and state, and for parents to be, that's our ultimate job, we are the primary teachers. And I quote from King Solomon, He said that in Proverbs that the beginning of wisdom, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now you don't have to believe in God, you don't have to, but a lot of folks do, and if you don't have that as your foundation, you're going to have some problems. And this is what happened to our humanist public schools. I mean, look at the crime rate, and it's not just in inner city schools. I got to know a principal in Kinderhook, New York, junior high. And I was meeting him in his home. He was very much against Common Core. And he said, we had a tough day today. I said, what happened? He said, we had a rape. A student, we're talking about 7th grade rape. Now, I went to school. I'm a little older than some, not as old as many. In the 70s, I was in junior high, and we had fights. I can't imagine ever a rape going on. But now, and it's in an upper middle class place like Kinderhook, New York, where they have rape. It's common.
Please, let me say something about that.
Yeah.
In college, when a girl or a boy goes to college and they want to pledge themselves to their fraternity or sorority, they commit some of the most atrocious
I'm sure they do.
sexual attacks on male and female alike, but mostly female.
Yeah.
And girls that blindly trust because they're in they're in a group where they're supposed to feel
prestigious,
safe.
yeah.
And even in high school, I mean, I don't know how many times you watch Law and Order and you see the unregrettable mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they're entitled to take from someone something that they're not willing to give, and yet if she's willing to give it, then they call her all kinds of names.
That's right. Yeah.
But the boys will be boys. The
Well, the
contradictions
boys, boys don't have to do that. Just like there's a notion that teenagers have to be rebellious. Well, I have a 21-year-old. When she was a teenager, she was never rebellious. There are times when she had her moments, but I have a 17-year-old son who's very respectful. In fact, I was hoping to bring him with me today. He's very respectful. Yeah, he has his time when he can be a little difficult, like all of us, but he's not rebellious. He doesn't deny what his parents stand for. In fact, he's embraced it, and he's embraced it not because we force it on him. And I know if he was to move out tomorrow, that he wouldn't go out to the bar rooms or go to the crack dens. I know he knows what's right and wrong, and that's the way we raised him. We raised all our children that way. And some parents don't have that. Some parents are either they shelter them so much, or it's so laissez-faire that parents will say, well, let them make their own decision, and they don't have the ability to make their own decision. So it's going to be the gang member, the gang leader is going to make the decision for them. It's really interesting.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be a gang, because when boys or girls cluster together in their age group in school,
or cliques,
it's the clique.
Yeah.
And they forget that they have the right to say no because they're afraid of of being rejected.
They want to be accepted.
Exactly. And that acceptance comes at a very high cost to a lot of students, both male and female.
That's right. I know smoking in school. All of your friends do it. You better do it or you're not cool. That type of concept.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, if young people would fully realize that if their friend was really their friend,
that's right. They
would respect their right to make that person
to
make their own personal choice.
That's right. And now, in a lot of folks who criticize homeschooling, and it's not there isn't any perfect system. There are times when there might be little places where, we should have emphasized this more and that more, but that's where you can remediate.
Yeah.
It's not impossible to do that. They'll say that the homeschool children need socialization. They tend to be very shy and bashful. Well, that's not my experience. In fact, I've noticed that homeschooling children tend to relate to adults better than non-high
age
school
group. Yep.
I know that I've been involved with summer camp programs for many, many years, and I can almost spot the homeschool versus the public school because how they relate to you. I mean, you shake their hand, they look at you in the eyes, and they say, nice to meet you and thank you very much, as opposed to this, this look down.
Yeah, the timidness.
I'll never forget, I was about 4 or 5 years ago, I was in Troy, New York. I'd get to Troy on a somewhat regular basis, and I was meeting somebody in a coffee shop, and there was this little black fellow, he's about 12 years old, and he's in a school uniform, like a parochial school type uniform, and he holds the door for me, And he says, "Have a nice day, sir." Very sincere, and and he wasn't asking for a tip or anything. And he walked and he met his mother, and I said, "Redemption Christian Academy," and the mother looked. "How did you know where you went to school?" Because I didn't really know what kind of uniform they were. I says, "Well, because I know the type of person that comes out, the caliber of student that comes out of there," and he displayed that type of caliber. And of course, this is where he went. So they were getting something very good in this private Christian school. In fact, it's one of the few black, it's not all black, but it's predominantly black boarding school. They love them. They teach them right from wrong. And they've internalized this, and I'm sure that this boy today, well, he's probably 19 or 20. He's probably making the right choices in his life. He's probably got a job, and he's going to be a productive member of society. And that used to be that way. Many years ago when public schools, my good friend, he should be a guest on the show, Sam Blumenfeld. He went to New York schools in the 30s, where he learned how to read. The teachers taught you things, and you liked, because when someone helps you learn something, you're gonna respect that person.
Respond.
I don't care what your politics are. If you're a nurse and you teach me first aid, this is good stuff. I'm going to respect that. You don't have to worry about what party you belong to. If I'm a teacher teaching history and you learn certain things and facts, and if I'm wrong about something, or maybe I have a position on a certain person and you have a different one, let's talk about it. I'm not going to flunk you. Maybe I love George Washington. You don't. You tell me why you don't, and let's discuss this. Learn how to think properly. You see, I had my 8th grade history teacher, Mrs. Wolf. I don't know what party she belonged to. She had a love of history, and I said, there's probably a few things that I may disagree with her on. One of the things she said that the Constitution upheld slavery. I would not agree with that, but.
Say that again?
No, one of the things she said is that the U.S. Constitution upheld slavery.
Upheld slavery?
Upheld it, yes, when she makes reference. And a lot of people have this perspective, that what you call the 3/5 compromise in Article 1, when it came to a census for the purpose of representation.
Counting humans, yeah. They didn't count.
Five blacks were counted as 3.
Oh.
Now, the reason why that was done, this is the states with large slave populations wanted to count every person, slave and non-slave, which would have meant more representation in Congress. And now at that time, there were 13 states, and all but Massachusetts. Massachusetts was slowly abolishing slavery. I mean, it was within 10 years. But Massachusetts had a very relatively small slave population, and they weren't going for this because they would have been more in North Carolina, South Carolina, and I think Georgia, one of the original 13, would have had a few extra members of Congress. So they said, look, this is what we do. We're not denying anyone's personhood, but since you don't consider them full persons, and legally, we'll count 5 for 3. So it was a compromise, but it actually worked against slavery. And also, the Constitution never said states cannot rescind slavery, and within a certain amount of time, within a short time, 20, 30 years, half the states abolished slavery. So that was my point there. So,
the thing that's a component of what you've just talked about is...
And let me point out, too, slavery was nothing unique to the United States. Slavery has been a condition of man since the fall of man.
Thank you. Since the beginning of time.
There's been a lot of, I'm not justifying the institution one bit, but in fact, Liberia, the country that was founded by former slaves in the United States, instituted slavery. And as a movie called America, what would the world be without her? The man who produced the movie, Denis D'Souza, he made reference to the fact that there were probably over 3,000 black slave owners in the South. And most people have no idea of that. So it's not something that's unique to white America or to southern states.
Oh, no, I agree with that because I grew up in a Spanish
Indians
community.
enslaved each other. South America probably was the most brutal form of slavery. And you don't hear anybody in South American countries feeling terribly guilty about slavery in those countries.
I know, because it's been such a normal form of life.
And today you have countries like communist China that have forms. It may not. They use slave labor. Many countries, the old Soviet Union, many other countries, you heard about sweatshops and child labor. So that's nothing. That's nothing unique. The good thing about our country is we got rid of it. It took a while, but we got rid of it.
We got rid of it, but there's still the other side of that. There's a lot of it going on that's not yet known because.
Well, it's interesting. A few years ago, there was a ship. They ran aground off the coast of Massachusetts. It was full of Chinese slaves. They're brought here from China. Some cases they're sold. Maybe their parent. They're sold here.
I know
to work
children.
off. Yeah,
yes.
Well, children, women, what have you. And it may not be millions, but there's dozens and hundreds of thousands.
Still anti-Christian. I'm sorry, it is.
No question about it. Yeah.
Look, I did. We used to be at another location.
I remember up the street a little bit. Yeah.
MCAM, Manchester Community Access Media. We were down in God, I can't think of it. Commercial Street.
Right by the river there.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And I did a story about a man. It took him 5 years to get liberated. He was brought here. From another country, he and another man, and they shackled him at night so that he couldn't get out. And then the little bit they paid him, he had to pay rent for living in.
Where was this?
I don't remember the details, but it was in the United States.
What was the time frame?
I would say within the last 20 years.
Really? Amazing.
Okay, and somehow he met an advocate. Or an advocate, I don't know how that, I don't remember it because I do so many things that I forget the details. I would have to reread it. But she got him liberated. Mm-hmm. And the farmer was fined. I think he even went to jail. But there's a lot of that. People are conveyed here in those cargo things on ships.
Yep.
I mean, there's a host of human beings in there from different parts of the world. And even in our own country, from Mexico, they bring them here.
Oh, yes, they're called mules, the people that bring them over here.
Coyotes.
I'm sorry, coyotes, that's right. Thank you for correcting me. Mules.
No, well, they could be mules, too, because, know, and they're their own people that they're subjugating.
That's right. And they're paying big money.
Exactly.
And many times they're dying in the desert. We'll bring you to the desert and we'll go that far.
And the women are raped along the way.
Yeah, exploiting people.
And these are American businessmen and women that use these people.
Yeah,
so how come our country isn't doing more about that?
Well, because there's a vested interest in both political parties. The Democrats are looking at future voters. I'm saying some, not all. I'm generalizing. And the Republicans look at it as cheap labor. But there are Democrats that hire cheap labor, too.
But you know what? The point is, it's supposed to be against the law.
That's right.
So how come they can continuously get away with this?
Look at what Obama did recently with his so-called executive order. You see, you pass a law. The Constitution gives Congress the power to determine immigration policy, right? Article 1, Section 8. And used to be that, and over the years, they've made different laws in some cases, but usually somebody came here, they had to be proved not to be a burden on the taxpayer. So somebody had to provide for them until they were able to get a job. And there was a policy maybe 5 or 6 years before you became a U.S. citizen, and you had to learn about our history and make an effort to learn the language. Education. And then when you were sworn in, you had to break all allegiances with your former country.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean you can't respect your culture or your history. You can't, that's fine. But you were no longer an Italian or a Polish person. You were a U.S. citizen of the United States of America. And today, that's not so. There's no it's not much assimilation going on. And now you have these pockets of folks who have no interest in learning about our history, our culture, and can be exploited. I remember years ago riding on the old Orange Line in Boston, the subway line, and that's the first time I saw bilingual signs. And the first sign that said, "In case of emergency, please obey the orders of the train crew." And then in Spanish, "El caso,"
whatever. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, if I can't speak English and the train guy can't, I mean, he might say, "Jump out here." Okay, I can figure that out. Mm-hmm. Then I said, this is keeping them at a disadvantage. And I think there's a vested interest in people who like to exploit that. Let's exploit these. Let's get their cheap labor, and let's get their vote. and let's make sure they don't learn English. They don't learn about the system. They don't learn about our heritage. And what's fascinating to me is that people come here because situations in their countries aren't so good. Then they come here and they want to have the same situation that they left. It's like a death wish. It's like people from Massachusetts, liberals that come into New Hampshire. Oh, they don't have any sales tax. Oh, they don't have. And next thing you know, where's our services? Where's all the stuff that we expected when we lived in Massachusetts? Well, that's why you came up here. Now you want the same thing. Yeah.
Let me say something about what you just said about some of these people that remain in that mind frame from where they escaped.
Yes.
In the home, my family just had the first baby of the 6th generation.
Really? Now, what's your ethnic background?
Well, it's kind of, it's Taino Indian.
Really?
And Spanish. But I'm kind of torn with that because the island of Puerto Rico was not Puerto Rico. It was Borinquen, and it wasn't.
They were an Indian. Yeah,
Taino Indians, and they were a very democratic Indian tribe. The women,
I've met a gentleman. In fact, he was hosting a cable TV show. Fascinating guy. I really enjoyed speaking with him down in Connecticut. He was 100%
Taino.
Yeah.
And the thing is that along comes Spain and other countries. And they almost literally wiped out the Taino Indian tribe. They kept what they needed, and then they destroyed the rest. But in 1999, the National Geographic did a DNA survey of some of the older members of that community in that time frame, and they found that 50% of the DNA was still Taino.
Really? Yeah.
And so the thing is that the upbringing. If I had stayed at home, I might have turned into one of the most malicious human beings you could ever possibly meet. The brutality of the teachings of our family elders was so brutal that it caused me to run away from home.
Really? Yeah.
And it took about the 4th generation. My sister is an incredible mother and grandmother. She ran away. And she would not inflict on her children what had been inflicted on her and myself. And so sometimes when you're pre-programmed by your family's heritage, it's almost like it's a sacrilege if you don't follow them because you're supposed to respect your elders. Yeah. So it takes time to break that link in that mentality of slave mentality, familial slave mentality, that fosters, all kinds of other enslaving